Welcome back to In the Arena, guys. Today's episode we are joined by Rachel Mccann, international women's hockey player, representative of New Zealand. Not just an elite athlete though, incredibly talented and very smart. She studied positive psychology and is also the host of the Happy Athlete podcast. Now, today's conversation is incredible, and I'm very grateful for the fact that she got vulnerable, shared some of the lowest times in her career. But with that being said, she also shared some valuable insight into how to respond to those times, how to carry yourself as a human. And I think above all, that's the most important thing at the end of the day, to hold yourself in high regard and maintain your character no matter what the circumstances in your journey. Now, it's also quite an incredible conversation because Rachel, being a podcast host, she also threw back some questions in my direction, and it really made me think on my feet too. So the conversation went back and forth, and I really hope that today you guys get some valuable insight into the journey of her hockey career, but also high performance sport and the mindset and mental side of sport as well. So I hope you guys enjoy. Welcome back to In the Arena. Today I'm joined by Rachel Mccann. Super excited about today's conversation because for a change it's going to be Rachel being interviewed instead of you doing the interviewing on a podcast. So I'm super excited to rip into your story and who you are to start off with. But Rachel, yeah, super excited to have you on the podcast.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, it should be a pretty interesting one where I have to be the insightful person on the other end trying to give some good stories and whatnot. But yeah, I'm pumped to be on it.
There's no pressure with this at all, so it'll be fun. But as I like to start these podcasts off with is just tell us your story, who you are, where you're from, and I'm going to let you take the mic and go for it.
Yeah, so I grew up in Christchurch, like you, and I was always active as a kid. I did lots of different sports, which I think kids should do lots of different sports. But that's a whole another topic that we can dive into. So played netball, rowing, running, hockey, just loved sport and loved being outside and doing it. And I had two older brothers, so it was always competing against them and, in the backyard, and they always tested me, and it was good. But yeah, I was probably as a kid like a real striver. I don't even know where that came from, but I just loved trying to be the best at anything that I was trying to do. And I mean, in the academics field, like I was not the best, but by the end of high school and uni had learnt how to learn, so that was pretty important. But my sport was definitely my biggest passion, and yeah, hockey was, I loved it. I loved that you could always learn a new skill. I loved that you could always be challenging yourself to be better. And so ultimately when I went to go pick a sport, that's a huge reason why I chose hockey. I didn't want a monotonous sport where I was just out there running or cycling or rowing. Nothing against those sports, but I just wanted something where skill acquisition was always a thing that you could improve on. But yeah, my story there's been highs, there's been lows, and we can dive into some of the highs and some of the lows later on. But yeah, my sport's been a real vehicle to becoming the person that I am today, and yeah, that's probably the story. I mean, I could go into boring stories about uni and whatnot, but yeah, where I am today is just kind of coming to the end of my career, and yeah, like probably more in a reflective place more than anything else.
That's there's a lot of things to obviously dive into there, and as you touched on, we can jump into those, but that's a pretty cool place to be right now in terms of like reflecting on, I guess you're in a time reflecting on your story and where you've been. So then hopefully throughout this conversation we can actually do that. But let's dive into the very first point that you said is growing up playing different sports and why that's important. And obviously you're quite passionate around that. So why is that important? Why should kids growing up not just specify on one?
Yeah, I mean, it's a big debate, like early specification, especially if you want to make it. But I think a real critical thing for young kids is to get lots of movement patterns and be able to do lots of things. And if you look at the majority of the really good greats that they played multiple sports growing up. And even like my mates that I talk to or that are in elite athletes, they did everything. They did rugby, they did netball, and they learned how to jump properly. They learned, and it's all transferable stuff. And I mean, I think about like rowing, for example. For me, when I did it, so I rowed from year 9 to year 12, and then in year 13 I just focused on hockey because I was in like 7 different hockey teams, so there wasn't much time for anything else. But like the skills that I learned of how to push myself in rowing, like they're definitely one of the reasons that I did well in hockey, because I was able to like go into the hurt locker and just stay there and kind of enjoy it in a weird way. But yeah, I think like this idea that if you do one sport, it's like when your body's growing, you need to expose it to different things, and if you keep repeating the same movement over and over again, like you're just kind of setting yourself up for tendon issues and overload injuries. And I just think that kids, well, even adults, like you'll know, you play sport because you love it. It's not because you have this idea that I'm going to be a professional athlete. Maybe some kids have that, but that's the really small percentage. The majority of kids just want to play sport to have fun. And I think if you specialize your child into one specific area too early, like the risk of burnout is just, it just goes up because, yeah, I don't know. What do you think?
No, it's interesting that you talk about the burnout side of it, because when you're saying that you're training like these different muscles and you get these different movement patterns down, right? One of the things that I hear you talk about a lot in your podcast is like the mindset and the mental. And that's just as important, if not more important, of a muscle and a tool. And then if you're specifying so early, and all of this pressure all of a sudden comes onto these kids, where all of a sudden these expectations from either society or coaches, could be parents, these external factors, then it becomes this thing that just weighs on your brain and on that one muscle. Whereas that pureness of joy and enjoyment and expressing yourself just by the love, right? It's like, how can you actually keep that so pure for so long? So yeah, for myself, it was like football was quite similar. Like growing up, I was in multiple different teams, but I also loved basketball. I also loved athletics and playing touch rugby, things like that, and just enjoying it with my mates, because yes, I could take football seriously, but then at the same time, if you get to just go express yourself and try other things, it just helps you in the long term. But how important is that, do you think, for kids in terms of on the mind? And do you think that's why we can have this idea that we fall out of love of the game so early and lead to burnout?
I think like what I'm slowly realizing is that everyone's different. Like, and I actually had a really good conversation with a friend who, Olympic champion, whatever, and we were actually talking about it in the sense of retirement. And it's not a one size fits all, but and it's the same with early specialization. Some kids just absolutely love their sport and they know they want to do it, and I fall into that bucket a little bit as well, but I think it was really good to have that exposure to all of those other, especially as you're growing up, like maybe as you start to get like for me in year 13, so I was 16, 17, I really was like, I love hockey. There was really cool events like the Youth Olympics where I was, given opportunities to captain, and I wanted to put my best foot forward in those ones. And so I started to focus more on hockey. But it's also the systems that go around the sport, like hockey, for example. In my final year of hockey of school, I was playing for 7 different teams. So I was in like the first 11, the Youth Olympic team, New Zealand, the Canterbury under-18 team, the Canterbury under-21 team, the Canterbury Cats squad, the New Zealand under-21 squad, I think, and then my club team. So like it was just, there was so much hockey, and like I loved it and it was great, but kind of that also helping see the long game is also pretty important, and making sure that you're in the gym doing your muscle balance stuff, getting everything moving properly. I think you can just set yourself up to be like a better athlete if that's what the goal is, you know what I mean? But it's really hard. Like, God, you wouldn't have been able to tell me to not do any of them. And I ended up pulling out of the Open Women's Canterbury team eventually, but probably should have done that earlier and should have just like realised it's all good to be in 6 teams. You don't have to be in 7,
Yeah, 6 or 7 doesn't make a difference at that point. It's like, how did that work in terms of your training, your schedule? That would have been mad.
It was insane. Like, I literally got off the plane from Singapore at the Youth Olympics and spent one night at home and then went to Federation Cup and played in the Fed Cup. And I was a bit of a broken athlete by the end of that. I was like strapped up, like, get me out there, hamstring or quads or whatever. But like, I just, my family's not really a sporty family. Like, well, we are a sporty family, but I didn't have like a parent that was an elite athlete or anything like that. So and it's as you especially for those kids that are sort of like the top players of the grade or whatever, or for their age, it's just like about protecting them as well. And like they're going to want to say yes to everything, but that doesn't mean that just because you can doesn't mean you always should, and it's like really looking at those systems. Where am I going to get really good development? Maybe where am I going to have that balance of being a top player where I get the ball lots versus being in a club side and being the young one and where you're learning lots, and giving yourself an array of those experiences but not overdoing it as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. And where do you think that comes into play? Does it come from the setups of the clubs, the organisations, and actually having the people in place for those systems? All
the sports are different, and all the athletes are different because there might be different requirements from each sport. But I think it definitely the solve is communication and having really good communication between the athlete and the coach understanding, okay, this athlete has 15 different trainings, okay, maybe they don't need to come to my training this morning, and like to actually help that athlete develop, you might not be the person on the pitch that does that, you might be the coach that says, all good, prioritize your sleep, you don't need to be at this morning training. And like I definitely had coaches that did that when I was growing up, for sure. And it's just as well for parents, like being okay with, sleep is actually the number one, recovery tool. And if my child is getting in at 9 p.m. or 9:30 and then getting up for a morning training, it's like, well, they're not getting their 8-9 hours, so like they're not recovering, they're not building muscle as well as they could be, they're missing out on all these really important things. And then you add in also like they've got schoolwork and they've got exams and they've got these stresses, and just balancing it. I think it's really hard, it's really difficult. I'm not saying it is easy, but it's important.
Yeah, do you think it's especially as the kid and as that athlete, it's like when you're so involved in that and all you want to do is try and impress when you're at that level, right? Because now maybe you are thinking about the things like Youth Olympics, you're thinking about at this age of 17, can I represent Canterbury or New Zealand? It's like, okay, the more game time, the more I want to do, almost I have to do this in order to get seen, right? It comes down to the individual and being like, okay, you know what, quality versus quantity at that point. And how do you think, as a young athlete, if you were to go back and like actually talk to yourself then, what would you say and be like, how can I raise this voice? How can I actually say and communicate properly to those people?
I think one of the most important things, probably if I could go back, is get myself a really, really good mentor that had done it, had I could see, because I knew I wanted to be a black stick when I was 16, 17. It was a dream, and I looked up to players like Kayla Whitelock and Emily Naylor, and even just like reaching out to them and being like, how did you do it when I was 17? How did you do it? What do I need to, like, what are the pitfalls I need to watch out for? What are the things that I can do that is going to speed up this process, and like getting a really clear plan, and then that makes it easier to be like, okay, I've done 2 sessions today already and my school has another training, I actually don't need to do that one, and looking at how do I really develop and again, it's nuanced to what's the thing for you as a player that you have to improve. Is it your fitness, is it your speed, is it your tactical awareness, and how are you going to do that and invest your time really wisely in that. And just like the other key thing I think is like, I spent a lot of my career trying to be what I thought other people wanted me to be as a player, and often it was, you're not fast enough, and it's like, well, okay, but like speed is relatively genetic. I'm not really going to get that much quicker. Like I can do all I want in the weights room, but someone that's got the genetic makeup is always going to outsprint me, and so I probably wish earlier on in the piece I had just really realised what my strengths were as a player, and really honed in on them a little bit more from an early age. So it's, like I was excellent on the ball. I had a pretty good nous for scoring goals, and I had really good basic skills. And so you can do a lot if you have that. But I kind of reckon even toward the end of my career, playing in Belgium, I really had a firm knowledge of what I brought as a player, and just kind of leaned into that, rather than trying to be the winger that sprints up the sideline. It's like, well, no, that's not really my role, So I think that looking at that strengths and so even breaking that down further to what do you find easy, that's a really, if you just think about yourself as a player, what do I find easy? And maybe it's I'm really good at hitting the ball, I'm really good at seeing passes, or I'm really good at reading plays. And then what do you enjoy doing? Because that's going to, make it easier to do as well. And that's your bread and butter, and then you still try and get better at the things that you're not so good at, but don't waste your time on things that, I don't know, you're not going to make huge gains on.
Yeah.
Do you think that? Have you had that reflection from your time as well?
No, I haven't really put it into that way. I've had, over the last 2 years when I came over to Europe and started figuring out kind of where I want to go and how to get there, you definitely look at your strengths and what you enjoy doing and how you go about that. And then I think having that clarity and actually breaking it down into the awareness of what you can do on the day-to-day in training to actually make that better. So actually having those small steps and being conscious of it on the day-to-day, but then really analysing when you do make the mistakes or when you do have these flaws in your game. At the end of the day, it's okay, how can I just tweak little things here and there to then, it's not make up for it, but just to, it's almost limit unforced errors, right? So then you're just performing on a more consistent basis, and then when you take those strengths that you have and you really show them and utilise them, that's the game changer at the end of the day. Because what I've come to figure out is with sport, especially in football or wherever you go, right, your career is based on the opinions of other people at the end of the day. It's all it could take is one game in front of one coach, scout, person watching, and then it's oh yeah, you know what, we like this person, let's give him a look somewhere else, or give her a look somewhere else. And the reality is that, especially when you go into trials, I had trials when I went over to America. I got told by one of the coaches at one of the professional clubs, yeah, you're not loud enough. I was like, all right, I thought I was the only one talking during this whole trial, but all right, I'll take that into consideration for my next one. But then I also was just trying to show off the strengths that I had in terms of my passing. So it goes different ways, and as I said, it comes down to the opinion of others. It's such a, and that's what's really tough to deal with, I think, a lot of the times. I think that dealing with that, go for it.
Yeah, and I think like a lesson that I've for sure learnt is that like you kind of just have to like not wait, that's the wrong way of putting it, but like it's sort of like games within games. So like in sport, you know, like one of the really key like aha moments that I had was on a meditation kind of course, and it was, you know, like once you make a mistake, the next play could be the play of your life, or it could be not a great play, you know. And if you're always thinking about that mistake, you know, it's probably going to be a not great play. But that's the beauty of sport, that you don't know what's coming next. And it's a little bit like that when you zoom out as well on your career as a whole. Like a coach can get fired, and then the next coach might really like you, so you're in, you know, or the coach that comes in might not like you, and so you have to be kind of adaptable on how you adaptable, and kind of just like you said, put a little bit of space between the opinions and you, because if maybe you just don't fit the setup of how they want to play the game, you know, and that's fine. It doesn't mean that you're a bad player. It just means that at that point in history you didn't fit the mold, you know. Like it's sort of like, you know, Matt Todd sitting behind the greatest Rachel Mccann, the greatest number 7. It's like Matt Todd is an excellent flanker, but like if you're sitting behind Rachel Mccann, you're sitting behind Rachel Mccann. Like you kind of just have to, like there's this, I think, an adaptability that you have to have as an athlete to maybe be like, okay, let's just let's zoom out, let's look at it like, what can I do? Okay, like, and for me it was like, I can go over to Europe and I can play and I can get paid, get accommodation, get car, like have a really, like, enjoy my sport. You know, it's maybe not exactly what I wanted to do, but like, you know, it's still a really nice experience. It helps you grow as a person, and then you never know, you know, like that's what happened to me in 2018. Went over to Germany, played a season over there. You know, the idea was always to try and get new skills to then come back and learn more about a different style of hockey, and come back and try and get back into the Black Six, so that, you know, and in that time frame, you know, the coach changes, and then come back in, really fit, play well, go to the Olympic qualifiers, you know, have an amazing experience. And yeah, it's just like you were saying, like not holding too tightly to the opinions of certain people, like, and that's what I link it back to, the get a mentor. Like, get someone who's on your team who can be straight up with you, direct, they understand you, but they can also like give you that perspective sometimes, you know, without them being like a selector or
yeah, it's powerful, and to have that separation is very, very important. It's great you jumped into that story of going overseas, and I want to jump into that later, but I want to ask you about what led to that in the first place, and kind of go to one of the more, I guess, difficult questions, if you want to take that way. But it's like one of the biggest challenges that you've had in your career, and reading through a bit of your story, it was when you got cut from the original Olympics team, when you had this big goal of representing New Zealand at the Olympics. Can you talk to me about that process and just that story and that little part of your career and that life?
Do you mean 2016 or 2020?
2016.
Yeah, right. Yes, I've actually not made it to 2 Olympics, but for different reasons. Yeah. So in 2016, I'd made every tour up until the last one before the games, and you know, I was still pretty young, and I I had that dream, like it was always the dream to go, and like I'm even getting a bit emotional about talking about it now, but I didn't make the final cut, and I remember like driving home over the harbour bridge, and like just the realization struck me that I like wasn't going to be going to the games, and it was really hard. Like those are the like face down in the arena. There you go, the podcast. Face down in the arena moments where you're like, it's tough. You're like, your whole, you've been working for 4 years to go to that event and reach the pinnacle of your sport and perform, and that realization. But I guess like a couple of years on, I did a diploma of positive psychology and wellbeing, and there's an exercise where you get your close friends to write about times where they've seen you at your best. And I actually had a teammate, and she wrote to me about the experience after being dropped, and how I like turned up to training, the next training, and just like gave it my all and made sure that the team was put in the best position to go to the games and try and win. And like, they're the moments that you look back on and you're like, far out, that was hard, but I turned up as the person that I wanted to be in that moment. And I think that's like really important, that that even in the hard moments you try and be like your best self, or you try and be the highest version of yourself that you can be, even when it's really tough. And I guess that's resilience, so it was a hard old experience, but I think it's what shapes you,
Yeah, it's a heartbreaking moment for when athletes understand how much effort and work and passion, the emotion behind it as well. It's couldn't have been an easy thing, but credit to you for turning up still with that attitude, and to look back on that time, you must take quite a lot of pride, and especially other people recognizing that as well. Like to be able to have people understand your character and the values that you actually have as the human at the end of the day, I think is much, much greater than what anyone says about what you achieve on the field. And it's quite interesting because I know you've done an episode with Quinny, and I talked to him on the latest podcast, and one of the quotes that I asked him about is what I heard you talk about, and it was, if you're nothing without the medal, then you'll be nothing with it. And I think that's what that kind of moment comes down to. And how do you kind of interpret that, and what was your passion behind that kind of quote?
Yeah, it definitely took me, well, even like missing the 2021 games sort of through injury and not being able to get back for it. Like, I wouldn't say that I'm like, yeah, no, that quote makes complete sense. It's, dropped in, and I'm totally enlightened to understand it, because you're striving for that goal, and you want it, and part of the striving is what makes you really, really good. But I think like what it kind of comes down to is, like, it's super cliche, but if you can kind of put your hand on your heart and say, yeah, I did everything I could, and at the end of the day I wasn't good enough, or there was people, like the Matt Tot, there was people that were exceptional in your position, or like maybe they wanted a different style or whatever. You can put your hand on your heart and say, yeah, I did everything I could. I controlled all of the controllables, and then at the end of the day, an uncontrollable, which is the opinion of someone else or a selection, meant that I didn't have a seat on the plane. Like, that's all you can really do. And I think, we need to talk more with young athletes about their values and how they want to show up, and what that means in an actual context. And it means, for me, it was like excellence was a value that I had, and that meant turning up to the next training and pushing, and so it's like these girls are going to Rio, and I'm going to make sure that they are in the best shape possible, and that's my job now. So yeah, and that, it's hard, but it's what you sign up for when you're part of a team.
Yeah, that's super powerful, and I genuinely appreciate you sharing that side of it, because it's pretty raw as well.
But that doesn't mean that there isn't emotion to it,
Of course.
Like it doesn't mean that I didn't sit in my room and cry, Like I'm definitely saying for young athletes that are, going through a selection or have had missed out, it's like you have to have that emotion. You have to have things in place that, like, maybe it's going and talking to a friend, or talking to a mentor, or just sitting there and crying, or maybe just like, I don't know, whatever the little thing is that gives you joy, going and doing that, or whether it's being in nature, I don't know, it's having those tools in your toolbox and being like really open to those. And there's a really good quote that I actually like. I can't remember who said it, but it said, if you get knocked down, make sure you land on your back, because if you can look up, you can get up.
Love that.
And there's quite a few times I've actually like replayed that quote in my head in the tough times, yeah, so I think, but it's, again, going back to that point, like, things in sport change so quickly, and you just, if for a young athlete listening, it's like, have that space if you can to, and it's really hard, but it's like, you never know. Like you said, you could play a really good game in front of the one selector that actually matters, and you've got your ride to university.
That's it, right?
And that's great,
Yeah. It's a crazy world, that any sport that you live in, especially when you've got goals and aspirations, it's just so many uncontrollables at the end of the day, and that's what is one of the biggest struggles. Now, when you're going through that time, there was a quote in an article that, when I read through it, legitimately read, "Fell out of love with hockey." Did you experience that at a point? And how, as an athlete, when you've given so much to yourself and to the game, how was that as a big shaping point for you?
Yeah, I can't actually remember when that quote was said. Do you have the dates?
not in front of me, but it was just a quote.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's like that perspective as well. Like, you might have moments where, you fall out of love, and I definitely did. I think probably when, I listened to Dr. Lucy Holmes speak, and she was talking about burnout, and she was saying that, like, a key element of burnout is doing the things but not getting the result. And so you're working really hard, but the result, I actually really need to go back and listen to what she said. Yeah, but sorry, actually, scratch that, you can cut that. What she said was doing the work but feeling ineffective. And yeah, I think there was periods where, like, when I got dropped in 2017, I moved home, lived with my parents. We had an amazing setup at our house where it was a turf, and there was a goal in there, and I just, like, honestly just did 3-a-day trainings for like 1 hour, 2 hours, sometimes 3 hours, just goal shooting, just with the sole purpose of, like, getting back in the team and wanting to be part of it. And it took me 2 years of just doing that. It was like an absolute grind. And so I think there's just, like, you can overdo it sometimes, but I mean, like, I always just, like, loved my sport, and so I think I just got a bit burnt out, probably, is what happened when I said that quote, like, and I probably felt a bit ineffective at times. So again, that comes back to like having your mentors there, getting a plan, like having the courage to have conversations with coaches, and being really open and trying to just like understand what are the skill sets you need to make that next step, and then being adaptable, and sometimes taking things into your own control, you know. Like I remember as well at the end of 2018, after I'd played in Germany, I had a phone call with the coach, and like I hadn't been offered a contract in the 25, I was in the development squad, and I actually at that point, you know, I'd been in the program for 7 or 8 years, I'd been in and out, I'd already been in the development squad for a couple of years, and I just kind of was like, this doesn't feel like the right path for me to go into the development squad. And so I actually just removed myself from it, and then like I said, the coach changed, and then, you know, but I had to wait 2 years for the next opportunity, you know. So yeah, it's a grind sometimes, and you just have to be patient as well.
Yeah, it's powerful when you talk about burnout and the fact where you feel insufficient. I personally, ineffective.
Yeah.
There you go, get the language right. I personally felt I was really struggling at the beginning of this year. I was coming back from an injury and personally felt like I should be playing at a different level, or I'm not where I want to be in my career right now, and ended up living alone for the first time. And when I'm in this process, I'm really stuck in my own thoughts, and turned out to be quite a negative cycle. What I really struggled with was a lack of purpose, and that was what was leading me to struggle with this identity of myself, where I felt like my football wasn't my purpose anymore. This career and this sport wasn't really fulfilling me, because I'm not doing it every day to day. I'm not really fulfilling that. I'm not feel like I'm working towards something. It wasn't until I spoke with Quinny, with other people and those mentors around me, that was like, well, what else can you do to find that purpose, or what else can you try? Where else do you feel like you have this purpose, or where do I feel like I can fulfill my potential at the end of the day? And that's when I discovered this podcast, and discovered working into other things in my life as well. And I thought that was just so powerful, because then you wake up and you're like, oh, you know what, I've actually got something to work towards. You know what, when I separated that from my football, my career, I started to fall back in love with what I was actually doing, and making the most of my training and my career, and actually have ambitions and goals again, and I can actually see myself working towards it. It was just so powerful, and now you feel like you've got a purpose. So I think that's really powerful what you said.
Yeah, and it's super nuanced as well. Like, your story is different to my story, is different to, you know, my mate Grace's story, who's an Olympic champion. Like, everyone's story is really different, and they go through different times. And yes, there's like similarities about what's happening, but you kind of just have to like work through for yourself, you know, the little things that you've got on your plate, you know.
100%. That's do you find that, especially then you're talking about mentors and finding people to talk with about it, sometimes you feel like when you do have those conversations, you still actually feel quite alone, like, because it is an individual journey at the same time?
Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah, I think, like, also time is just kind of a key element of it. Like, for me, playing in Belgium, for example, like, I was chasing a very different feeling than probably I had been prior to going there, and that feeling that I wanted was just peace around my sport, playing well, enjoying it, and like, I managed to do that, which is great, and managed to get peace around it. And so, but I knew that that's what I had to do, you know, like, and it's like you're saying, there is a bit of a self-awareness piece, but I do think mentors can help you get somewhere quicker. And yeah, that's probably where I would land on there. But yeah, I think like it's really hard when you feel alone in it, and I think that's where it's good sometimes talking to other athletes, and just like hearing their story and understanding that some of the shit you're feeling is real normal. And like the people that haven't played the sport to that level, like they might just not understand it, and it's fine. They don't have to. And sometimes that might be your family, it might be your friends, like. And then sometimes, like, I've got a friend who didn't play sport to a high level, but like when I talk to her, I just feel heard, and like she gets it, you know, because she's seen me like through the journey the whole way from when we were like 13, you know.
Is that, I'm going to plug the podcast, is that one of the reasons why you started the Happy Athlete podcast?
Yeah, there were a couple of reasons why I started the Happy Athlete podcast, and probably one of them was I was a little bit unhappy as an athlete. But I don't think that's like super original, you know. We all kind of go through hard spells as an athlete. But yeah, there was a couple of reasons. I wanted to create a platform that would hopefully help younger athletes learn some of the lessons a little bit quicker, or just like hear little things and go, oh, I need to maybe think about that a little bit more, or maybe I need to think about my values, or oh, I just am really struggling mentally and can't deal with the pressure. Okay, I can go and like hear, you know, John Quinn talk about mental skills, you know. So I wanted a platform to help educate, and also as I've evolved as an athlete, it's kind of evolved with me, which is quite cool. So like you go back and listen to the few at the start, and I was in such a different place as a person versus the ones kind of toward the end. So that's kind of interesting to see that evolving. And then the other key reason I kind of started it is because I was listening to a podcast, and it was like an entrepreneurial one, and they were getting you to think about what's your unfair advantage. So like you have lots of things in your life that just like provide you with an unfair advantage, and one of them that I realized was that I had this like amazing network of professional athletes that I would see either on a daily basis because they were my mates, or I would come in contact with them just through events or whatever, or you just bump into them at the high performance gym because New Zealand's not that big. You know? So I was like, okay, I've got this great network, like let's just talk to some of them, you know. And being a black stick and an elite athlete, when you kind of hit them up on Instagram, they're like, sweet as, like, you know, you're not just like kind of a random punter that's not saying that that's the only reason that they reply, but yeah, so I was like, okay, let's just chat to some of them, and yeah, just wanted to learn from them. Like some of them were more experienced athletes, and I was just really curious around how they became who they were and where they were on their journey, and whether I could learn anything and take a little nugget and try and apply it to what I was doing.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more on that side of things. It's definitely, there's an element of selfishness that comes with it, and learning from other people's stories to then take yourself, but then, as you said, provide to others that maybe you didn't have at a younger age, or you maybe wanted to have when you're growing up, some of those skills, some of those stories, to, as we talked about just before, that feeling of, okay, maybe I do feel alone, just to understand that we are all walking similar paths. Maybe they don't look the same, but there can be similar stories and similar tools, tips, tricks, lessons in those that we can all share and learn. And one of the cool things is that when I'm talking to other people around it as well, like I've taken a lot from some of your your interviews, especially with like Artie Salvia talking about his faith and his like growing up in Wellington and just the roots from where he came and how he carries that with himself. It's like those are the things that are so powerful, and being able to relate that from a person in New Zealand when you're trying to take on big fish in the world, I guess, and go do big things. It's quite powerful to understand where you do come from and how relatable that is too. But it's so wicked just to be able to connect with like-minded individuals at the same time.
100%. And like the last podcast I did with Dave Wood, who's training some of like the biggest New Zealand athletes now, like Israel Adesanya and America's Cup team, and like I interviewed him right before like my semi-final for club in Belgium, and we were talking about agitation in the mind and like the fact that you just have to like still your mind at some points, and like I knew that, and I had been practicing that, and like I have a meditation practice, but I just had this like little click, like, oh, my mind is agitated right now, like I'm thinking about the semi, I'm thinking about like playing, I'm thinking about scoring, like there was no like, you know, kind of like levelness about it. And so I really like from there just like worked really hard in those kind of like weeks leading into the semi of just like stilling my mind, working with the agitation rather than like going to the next thing or whatever. And like it was awesome because I got to perform well, like scored in the semi, like, and you know that was like a tiny micro moment in the lead up, and it was just like through a conversation that triggered something that helped me. So my podcast has been really helpful just as I'm evolving. But the mind, it's like we need to spend more time on it with younger athletes. We need to teach them how to breathe. We need to teach them how to regulate themselves. We need to teach them about their values and how they want to turn up, and like help them understand that it's okay. Like even elite athletes at the top, like the top performers that you see, they're still working on their mental game. Like they're still trying to make little tweaks to what they're doing. And it's like we see, you know, you were going to ask me a question around like what are some of the things that I've learned from the podcast, and it's like some of the athletes that I've had on, like Artie Savia or Grace or Lisa Carrington, like we see the end product, we see them winning Olympic golds or being like World Player of the Year, and we hear them talking about it, but we don't see them getting up at 5 a.m. to go and do their training and like dealing with injuries and dealing with really hard shit and like mentally like just working on how they can be the best, or that 1%er. And I think it's like giving people a real, well for me it's like trying to help people understand that there's so much work that goes into becoming that, and when you see the finished product, like that's 10 years, that's a decade for when you see them doing that. And like for young athletes, don't rush, like yes, try and be the best you can be, but like don't tear yourself to pieces if you're not there yet, you know? Like I don't know if you found that as an athlete. Like I probably wasn't till I was like 25 that I realised, holy shit, this self-talk that's going through my mind is super rough and it needs to just like chill out. You know? I don't know, do you find that? And
that's what I've been going through this year, to be honest. I said like living alone at the start of the year was very, very hard, but it's actually provided me with the space and the time to spend time on my own and to actually really develop these techniques or just try different things to try and figure that out. But it's been conscious for me that I know how important the mental side of things are for quite some time, but it's one of those things that's so, because it's easy to do, it's also very easy not to do. It's like one of those things that you can kind of just brush aside, and sometimes if you don't do it, you're like, oh, you know what, but you know what, sitting for 30 minutes before I go to bed and just meditating helps with so much, and it's just trying to regulate who I am. I've completely changed from the player I was 2-3 years ago, where the littlest things would make me so pissed off and so angry, just the littlest mistakes, to now I'm like, you know what, just get on with the next play, because mistakes are completely normal. But sometimes when you put yourself in those pressure situations, you can get overwhelmed and you do get triggered by little things. So just trying to understand that, and it is, as you said, work in progress all the time. But I was actually going to ask you, like, when did that start? When did that become conscious for you? Because you said that you studied as well positive psychology too. So was it by practice first and then you kind of got interested in it where you wanted to find out more, or was it the other way around?
Yeah, it kind of links back to like also why I started the podcast, is that not everyone has access to people that have this expert knowledge, and for me, I was just, it was in the lead up to Rio, and like we were doing so much physical training, like, and I just mentally, we did hardly any, like we talked about values and culture and whatnot, but we hardly did any around, like, well, we did a bit, but walking toward pressure and putting yourself in those situations. And I think that's like one of the biggest things that I've learnt through a number of my podcasts, because now I have like locked onto that. Like I said, my podcast is kind of evolving with me, and I found that super interesting, is that you have to learn how to relate to the pressure, and it's a skill. Like it's and you've got to practice it, and you're always practicing it, and you're wanting to put yourself in those positions where you have pressure, and maybe the first time you just absolutely botch it, and it's like, well, that's fine, because sometimes when you're learning a new technical skill or a physical skill, you'll absolutely botch it, probably for the first 1,000 rounds, but we sometimes don't apply that same energy to the mental side of, oh, I made a mistake, okay, breathe, reset, next play, like, and just practicing doing that over and over again. And yeah, I think it's super important. It's like one of the best gifts we can give young athletes.
One of the cool things about your story is that you ended up, after adversity, you ended up finding yourself moving overseas, and it's a bold move for anyone, because sometimes you don't even know what you're getting yourself into, and it's going over to a completely new culture, completely new environment, different language. You don't know what's going to happen. As you said, like, you're learning how different teams play, different styles, etc., etc. Away from the sport side of things, and completely away from that, like their team and the athlete side of things, how important is it to get away from what could be the comfort of home and what you're completely used to go into a different place and go into experience these new cultures?
Yeah, I think again, it's really dependent on the person and where they are in their career, and yeah, like, I wouldn't say that everyone should do it. It's 100% the greatest thing ever, like, I think I had an amazing experience, but I had a really good experience where I was looked after, and the club was awesome, and like, my partner came with me, and it was cool. I think, yeah, it just depends where you are on your journey and what you're trying to achieve. Like I said, for me, a big part of it was peace and playing well and playing to the level that I knew I could get to. So when I had my concussion at the end of 2019, and it took me up until going to Belgium to be back playing the hockey, so 2022, playing the hockey that I knew I was capable of. Like, that's how long it took me to get my body back into the right condition. It's how long it took me to just get my skills back up. Like, and it really showed me that you have to be patient sometimes, especially when you're coming back from a major injury. It's like, you don't just get it like that. As much as you believe you should as an athlete, because you're like, I've done this for like 8 years, it's or 10 years, I know how to play hockey. That time on task, like, I wanted to get back into the Black Six, and I went to the trial, and like, looking back on it, I'd like changed position for that trial, and I'd done a couple of weeks of hard training, but I'd had such little game time under my belt. And so then, like, when you get through that experience and you're on the other side, you're like, oh, that makes sense. Like, of course I wasn't going to perform at my best because I'm in a new position and I've played like 3 games or like 10 games in the last 2 years, you know, like, like it's sort of like being able to have that perspective, but you can't. It's so hard to have it when you're in it, because you're like, no, like, I've trained, I know I'm capable of this, I'm gonna do it. So yeah, it's a tough one in that sense. But I think just like sometimes being patient and just like realizing and accepting where you are is really important as well, especially coming back from injuries.
Yeah, that awareness, just to try and take a step back and take that pressure off yourself. And it's like it's hard because you want to be a high performer, you want to be elite at the end of the day, and you want to, I mean, it come from an ego place as well. Like, you want to do well for your team, but you also want to do well for yourself and look like you're back to normal. So, I mean,
Yeah.
It's completely normal. I want to wrap up because you mentioned a word earlier, and it's been on my mind this whole podcast. And you mentioned the word retirement, and I was like, oh shit, all right.
Here we go.
So then I was like, all right. Then basically one of my final questions was, what's coming up for Rachel? What's next? What's the plans? Podcast, hockey, life. What's going on?
Yeah, what's going on? Hey, I'm figuring it out, and I think that's the beauty, right? You know, I played in Belgium, enjoyed it, like, played well, had a good experience. I've just moved to the UK with my partner, and yeah, I feel really at peace with hockey. You know, in saying that, you know, there's some days where you're going through the emotions of you know, it being such a big part of your life, and again, like, nothing's final, I guess, is the nice thing. It's maybe the theme of this whole podcast is, like, you don't know what's next, you know. And for me, like, a little break is what I'm doing at the moment, just, and, you know, talking to a few clubs over here, and maybe I'll play because I want to play and it'll be enjoying, or maybe I won't. Maybe I'll just move into other things. I think I'm just pretty open to things at this stage, because I did have that really beautiful experience of going and getting peace around it. But I think if I hadn't have had that experience, it would have been, again, like a different situation, you know, like I was talking about at the start, the retirement, like, everything's different. Because for me, I thought with the concussion, like, that was my career done. I didn't think I was ever going to be able to get back onto a hockey field, and, like, I was at some stages too scared to even do that. And so, you know, for me now, it's like, cool, I have peace. I had a beautiful career. I had amazing friends, some amazing experiences, and, like, yeah, maybe I'll go back to hockey and give it you know, keep playing, or maybe I won't. But that's the interesting part. You never know what's around the corner.
It's so true, and it's a great way
What are
to
you
wrap
doing?
up.
What's your
Because
plan?
what am I doing? See, I was just about to say it's a great way to wrap up, and I appreciate you asking good questions as well, because from another podcast you make me think. So, no, for myself, I'm in a place right now where I'm also in a stage of not just reflection, but I'm really trying to understand where I want to be, for values not just based around this idea of being a professional athlete. For a long time, I've really put an emphasis on becoming a professional footballer and being, I guess, identified as that. So this year's given me great peace as well, in that sense, where, you know what, I'm not actually going to be defined whether I am a pro or whether I'm not. That doesn't matter to me anymore. What matters to me is where I can fulfill my potential, where I can improve and enjoy the game, at the same time as where can I be best with my family and fill my cup up in other ways as well. So I'm just trying to figure out where that is, who that's with. But at the same time, as you said, you don't know who's going to be watching what. You don't know what opportunity is going to come up. So I've got another 3 months here in Finland until the end of the season, and in that time I'm just going to be trying to break down day to day, how can I keep getting better, but then also looking for the future as well. But yeah, thanks for jumping on, taking the time, and thanks for coming back with some incredible questions for me as well, because it's really made me think. But based on your experiences, based on your story, it's given me, and I'm sure everyone who's listening, some incredible insight into tips, tricks, and to understand that you don't know what's coming around the corner. So thank you for joining me in the arena, and I'm looking forward to tuning into your podcast as well and seeing where the next step in your journey goes.
Oh, thanks, Ben. Yeah, no, I love the podcast name. I love what you're doing. I appreciate how much work goes into the podcasting.
Thank you for tuning in to today's episode in the Arena podcast. Guys, if you got some value from this, please share. If you know someone struggling or going through a tough time in their career and you think that they can get value from listening to these incredible conversations with people who have been there, who have gone through these tough times, let them know that they're not alone. Let them know that, you know what, this is actually just a time where it's propelling you in a direction for success. Guys, follow me on Instagram at Ben_Stroud and on TikTok at In the Arena Podcast. I'm going to be trying to pump out some more content for you guys, because I think these guests and the people that are sharing these stories have got such incredible content that I just want to share with so many people. So follow me on there. Like, comment, subscribe, leave a rating, ask me any questions, hit me up, and guys, we'll see you back in the arena for the next one.